Hey there, and welcome to another episode of So You Tried to Kill Yourself? Now What? I'm your host, Olivia Catherine. Let's get real for a second. Shame is like this invisible weight we carry, and for so many of us, it's the reason we stay stuck. But what if I told you that the way out starts with understanding it? Let's dive into this together. But first, a massive thank you to every single listener who has joined me on this journey so far. I cannot believe it. Over 230 streams across all platforms. The majority of you are tuning in on Spotify, and I am so incredibly grateful for the support. To keep the celebrations going, the podcast has also hit 200 followers on Facebook and 40 on Instagram, and we're still growing. Stories continue to pour through the anonymous submission form and the DMs, and every single story shared stops me in my tracks. The courage you're showing to share these deeply personal, vulnerable experiences is what keeps this movement alive. One listener wrote, "Your podcast is like a breath of fresh air. It's finally helping me feel seen and heard." Reading those words made my heart burst. To know that this podcast is touching the lives of people that I have never even met, it's just beyond anything I could have imagined. I am over the moon, and I am so grateful for every single one of you. This episode, though, feels especially important today because, while yes, stories are coming in, I've also heard from so many of you who've said, "I'm not ready to share my story yet." And you know what? That's okay. It's okay not to be ready. But what strikes me is why people aren't ready. It's the shame of their experience. The fear of judgment, the weight of feeling like their story doesn't matter. And that's exactly why this episode matters so much to me. I feel so called to speak directly to anyone carrying that shame today. Without your voices, without your stories, I stand on this hill alone. And if there's one thing I've learned since my first suicide attempt at 13, it's that people need other people. We heal in connection, in community, and knowing that we're not alone. That's why I'm pouring my heart into this episode. Because if shame is keeping you silent, I want to help you take that first brave step toward releasing it. You are not your shame. You are not your scars. You are not alone. And when you're ready, your voice will add to this growing movement that's breaking the silence and changing lives. And until then, I'll be right here, holding space for you. Also, I've been overwhelmed with setting everything up, and I haven't been the best host in the Facebook group. The Rewrite Collective group is continuing to grow. We're now at 17 amazing members, and it's truly becoming a safe space for connection and conversation. If you haven't joined us yet, please do. This community is here for you. Together, we're breaking the silence, rewriting the narrative, and building a space where shame no longer has the power to hold us back. And one more thing. The Pack Your Kit activity is almost complete for members of the collective. I have been working behind the scenes effortlessly to set up all the tools and resources you need. And I can't wait to see how everyone uses it to create their own personalized mental health toolkits. Now, let's talk about shame, because that's really why we're here today. Did you know that shame is the number one thing that prevents people from seeking help for their mental health struggles? Studies have shown that shame can impact everything from self-esteem to relationships, and even physical health in silence. And when shame is left unchecked, it becomes a barrier to healing. Here's something that really stood out to me while researching for this episode. Shame is not just feeling bad about who you are. It's about believing you're unworthy of love and connection. Before we dive into today's episode, I just want to remind you that I am not a licensed mental health professional. I'm just someone sharing their story in hopes that it helps you feel a little less alone. If you're struggling, please seek support from a trusted therapist or a licensed mental health professional. And remember, you can call or text 988 if you're in crisis. If you need immediate emergency help, please call 911 or visit your local emergency room. Once again, shame thrives in silence. But healing begins when we name it, face it, and learn to release it. Today, we're diving deep into how to break the shame cycle, reclaiming your narrative, and taking back your power. So let's get started. Shame is that insidious voice inside our heads telling us that we're unworthy, defective, or inherently bad. It's not just a fleeting feeling of embarrassment. It's a deeply rooted, self-critical emotion that leaves us believing we are fundamentally flawed. Psychologists describe shame as an emotional response tied to self-image, making us feel disconnected, isolated, and unlovable. I would like to highlight an important distinction between shame and guilt. Guilt is about what you've done. It's the feeling that arises when you believe you've made a mistake or hurt someone. And it often drives positive change because it's tied to actions that you can fix. Whereas shame is about who you are. It makes you believe that you are the mistake, that you are broken, bad, or unworthy of love and connection. For years after my last suicide attempt, I carried the suffocating weight of shame. I told myself that I had failed, not just myself, but everyone who cared about me. The shame wasn't just a passing thought. It was a constant whisper in my mind saying, "You're too broken to ever be loved. You'll never be enough." The truth is, I felt shame for being alive, like I didn't deserve the second chance I'd be given. I felt shame that I couldn't handle life, that the everyday things people seem to manage with ease felt like mountains I could never climb. And I felt shame that I wasn't just magically better because I survived. I thought surviving was supposed to be the hard part, but the truth, living with the aftermath was so much harder. Every time I saw the scars on my legs, it felt like I was reliving that moment all over again. They weren't just physical reminders. They were evidence of my pain, my struggle, and my shame. I'd find myself wearing long pants in the heat of summer, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't want to answer questions. And it wasn't just about what others might think. It was the way I judged myself. I told myself I was weak for struggling, that I should just get over it, and I wasn't allowed to feel the way I did. That inner critic was louder than any external voice could ever be. But what I've learned, and what I wish I'd known back then, is shame thrives in silence. The longer that I stayed quiet, the stronger it grew, wrapping itself around me like chains. It wasn't until I started talking about my struggles, of course, tentatively at first, with trusted people in my life, that I began to loosen shame's grip. I realized that my scars, both physical and emotional, weren't symbols of failure. They were proof of survival. They were proof that I'm still here, still trying and still fighting. Breaking free from shame wasn't easy, and it's still something I work on every day. But sharing my story, even the messy, painful parts, has been the most liberating thing I have ever done. And if you're carrying shame, if you're stuck in the silence, I want you to know this. You are not your shame, you are not your scars, and you are not alone. Shame has a way of embedding itself deep within us, shaping how we see ourselves and the world around us. For many of us, it doesn't start in adulthood. It's something that begins early, often in childhood, when we're still learning how to navigate our emotions and our place in the world. Without the tools to separate bad feelings from our self-worth, we start to believe that we are the problem, not just that we're experiencing one. And that belief, it sticks with us, shaping the way we think, act, and feel for years to come. Shame, it manifests in many ways. You can be avoiding eye contact, or you're shrinking into yourself when you're feeling judged. You could be over-preparing or procrastinating out of fear of failure. You could avoid risks, stay quiet, or just try to blend into the background to avoid attention. These shame-driven behaviors can make life feel like an endless loop of self-doubt and avoidance. Over time, they create barriers, not just between you and others, but between you and the help you need. This is especially true for suicide survivors, where shame often becomes a silent but powerful force. Studies show that shame is often a major barrier for suicide survivors. Shame tells us to hide, to bury our pain, to keep our struggles secret. It's the reason no one talks about suicide, and it's why so many survivors remain silent. This silence is isolating us. One study found that shame contributes directly to depression, anxiety, and even anger. It's a key reason why survivors feel unworthy of support or help, and why healing feels so far out of reach. But the truth is, shame does not have to rule your life. So let's break it down. Shame creates a harmful cycle that can feel impossible to escape. Shame creates a harmful cycle that can feel... Shame, it creates... Shame, it creates a harmful cycle that can feel impossible to escape. So let's break it down. First, something happens. A suicide attempt, a perceived failure, or even struggling with mental health. That sparks the feelings of shame. But instead of viewing the event as a moment in time, you are probably looking at it as proof that you are flawed, unworthy, or fundamentally bad. Shame, it tells you that this isn't about what you did. It's about who you are. To protect yourself, you then start hiding. You'll start avoiding conversations, you'll isolate yourself, and you start suppressing emotions, believing that keeping it hidden will just make it go away. But secrecy only strengthens the shame. Instead of diminishing, it grows. Isolation leads to more feelings of worthlessness, anxiety, or depression, trapping you in a painful feedback loop. Over time, the cycle feels permanent. You start to believe that your shame is inescapable, further deepening the emotional toll and making it even harder to seek help or connection. So why is this cycle so dangerous? Because the cycle thrives in silence. I can't say that enough. The more you suppress or avoid it, the stronger it becomes, fueling the belief that you are alone in your struggles. It disconnects you from others and blocks you from healing. But the good news is that the shame cycle can be broken. Shame might feel hopeless, but the truth is, it's not. Shame thrives in secrecy, but the moment we begin to name it, face it, and challenge it, we weaken its grip. Breaking the cycle doesn't happen overnight, but with intention, self-compassion, and small actionable steps, healing becomes not only possible, but inevitable. Let's dive into how you can begin breaking free from your shame. Step 1. Name it. Shame feeds on silence, but it can't survive being spoken out loud. Recognize when you're feeling shame and call it by its name. Try this. Write about your shame in a journal or share it with a trusted friend, therapist, or safe community. Naming shame takes away its invisibility and it starts the process of dismantling it. For example, I feel shamed about my suicide attempt because I'm afraid of being judged. Step 2. Challenge it. Once you've named it, it's time to challenge the narrative that shame has created in your mind. Ask yourself, is this shame helping me grow, or is it holding me back? What evidence do I have that supports or disproves these beliefs about myself? Replace self-criticism with self-compassion. Your shame is lying to you about your worth. For example, I am not a failure because of my attempt. I survived, and that survival makes me strong. Step 3. Release it. Let go of unrealistic expectations. Healing isn't about perfection. It's about progress. Allow yourself to be human, knowing that mistakes and messy emotions are part of growth. Try this. Write down the unrealistic standards or expectations that shame has placed on you. And then I want you to physically rip up the paper or burn it as a symbolic release. And step 4, practice self-compassion. You have to be kind to yourself. Treat yourself the way you'd treat a close friend or a loved one who's struggling. And remind yourself, I am doing the best I can with what I know right now. Try this. Create affirmations to counter shame. Like, I'm worthy of love and connection, and my past does not define me. My actions today do. Did you know that when you confront shame head on, you create space for healing, self-growth, and authentic connection? You begin to see that shame is not a permanent truth. It's just an emotion tied to a moment. As you dismantle its hold, you'll find the courage to reclaim your story and move forward with clarity and strength. Here is a quote to inspire you. Shame dies when stories are told in safe spaces. Each time you share your truth, whether with yourself, a loved one, or a community, you're weakening the power shame holds over you. Vulnerability doesn't just break the cycle, it also empowers others to do the same. But reminder, healing is messy, but it's also beautiful. You are human, you are resilient, and you are worthy of joy and connection. The shame cycle does not define you. You define you. Now that we've uncovered the roots of shame and how it traps us, let's focus on what really matters: breaking free. Healing begins with action. So let's dive into the tools and steps that you can take to reclaim your story and start moving forward. Healing from shame is fucking hard. There is absolutely no sugarcoating it. But every step forward, no matter how small, is proof that you're building resilience and rewriting your story. The first step, naming your shame. Shame has a sneaky way of disguising itself. It hides under layers of anger, sadness, and even indifference, making it quite hard to pinpoint. But the thing is, you cannot confront something you won't acknowledge. Do you remember in Harry Potter when Harry or Dumbledore would say Voldemort and everyone would gasp? It was actually Hermione who boldly reminded everyone that fear of a name only increases fear of the thing itself. Shame thrives in secrecy and silence, but naming it, whether it's shame tied to your mental health struggles, suicidal thoughts, or past decisions, shines a light on it. And light, my friend, is what shame can't survive. So let's take that first courageous step together. If you're struggling with mental health, say it. If you're overwhelmed or stuck, acknowledge it. If you're carrying shame about your past, name it out loud. Because naming your shame doesn't just break its power, it reclaims yours. You're not defined by your struggles, and you're not alone in them. This is your first step to showing up for yourself in the most powerful way possible. The truth is, the only person who can release you from your shame is you. Transforming shame into strength is not an overnight process. It's a journey that requires self-compassion, patience, and a willingness to grow. It's not easy, but it's absolutely worth it. Yes, it is messy, uncomfortable, and far from linear. But let me tell you once again, louder and clearer, it is absolutely worth it. Breaking the shame cycle doesn't mean you'll never feel shame again. It means you're learning how to recognize it, process it, and choose to move forward without letting it define you. So let's walk through the cycle one more time. Except this time, we're going to be building onto that cycle with tools that will help you through it. This may be controversial, but shame, it's really just a word. And the word shame isn't inherently bad. It's really just your brain's way of protecting you from the fear of disconnection. But while it might start as self-preservation, it can spiral into feelings of unworthiness and self-doubt. The key is understanding that shame is just an emotion, not your identity. The tool mindfulness teaches us how to observe our thoughts and feelings without judgment. So, instead of internalizing shame as I am a failure, mindfulness helps you reframe it. I feel like a failure right now. This subtle, powerful shift will remind you that emotions are temporary, not truths. Now, when that shame arises, give it a name. When you give it a name, you weaken its power. Labeling shame as just an emotion creates distance, allowing you to see it for what it is. A moment, not a definition, of who you are. I want you to write this journaling prompt down. What's a moment of shame I've carried, and how can I release it? Journaling, it provides a safe space for you to process your emotions, giving them an outlet instead of bottling them up. It's easy to spiral into self-criticism when the shame arises. But what if instead you got curious? Curiosity shifts the narrative from, why am I like this, to, what can I learn from this? It helps you view shame as a signal, not a sentence. If you're able to, I would like you to write down 3 things that you're proud of, even amidst your shame. Gratitude shifts your perspective from what's wrong to what's worth celebrating, reminding you that you're more than your mistakes. While working through shame, it's important to acknowledge your inner critic. You. Yes, I am talking about that inner voice that loves to whisper harsh judgments. Do you remember the shame wizard from Big Mouth Season 2? He's essentially the personification of your inner voice that often amplifies shame. But the thing is, that voice isn't the real you. It's actually just a protective mechanism gone rogue. By recognizing and addressing it, you can start rewriting its script. I want you to think about how you'd comfort someone you love. Would you tell them they're worthless? Or would you say, you're doing your best and that's enough? I want you to offer yourself that same compassion. Replace harsh thoughts with kindness and watch how it shifts your perspective. It's also incredibly important to practice only what is helpful, not harmful. When shame hits, the instinct is often to withdraw or self-sabotage. For those of us who engaged in self-harm and substance abuse, this is where we get to break the cycle. Instead of leaning into behaviors that harm ourselves, we can ask ourselves, What action will help me heal in this moment? It might be taking a walk, calling a friend, or even just sitting quietly and breathing. Shame loses its power when it's shared in safe spaces. Reach out to someone you can trust and share something vulnerable. This act of connection reminds you that you're not alone and that your shame doesn't define you. Shame can feel like an endless cycle, but breaking it starts with choosing actions that nurture rather than harm. By focusing on connection and compassion, you create space for healing to begin. Shame often hides in the small, everyday thoughts and interactions that feel so natural we barely notice them. By learning to identify and challenge these behaviors, you can actually begin to break free from its grip. Let's dig into 2 common ways shame shows up and how we can disarm it. So first, we have to spot the shoulds and shouldn'ts. Shame thrives on unrealistic expectations and unspoken rules. These shoulds and shouldn'ts creep into your thoughts, creating pressure and judgment that just chip away at your self-worth. Examples of shaming thoughts are things like, I should have known better. I shouldn't have said that. They probably think I'm stupid. I should be further along in life by now. The problem with these thoughts is that they're rooted in perfectionism, not reality. They ignore your humanity and create a no-win situation where you're always falling short. So how do we disarm them? You have to challenge these rules. Who says you should have known better? Replace that judgment with compassion. I did the best I could with the knowledge I had at the time. Flip the script. Instead of, I should have done better, try, what can I learn from this? By challenging these internal rules, you shift from self-criticism to self-growth. And remember, it's not about you when someone else shames you, whether through criticism, judgment, or even subtle behaviors like eye rolls and dismissive comments. It is so easy to internalize their words and behaviors as a reflection of your worth. But remember this, babe, their shame is not about you. It's really about them. People who shame others are often carrying unresolved pain or insecurity, and their actions are projections of their own struggles. Examples of projected shame. How could you mess this up? You should have known better. You're too sensitive. How you can reclaim your power. Detach. Remind yourself that their words are a reflection of their story, not yours. Reframe it. Their judgment doesn't define me. It shows what they haven't healed. And then release it. Let go of the weight of their projections. You don't have to carry the burden of their pain. Shame is sneaky, but it loses its power when you learn to spot it, challenge it, and separate it from your identity. You are not defined by your shoulds, your mistakes, or the opinions of others. You are worthy of love, growth, and healing, just as you are. Before we continue, let's take a moment to pause and reflect. What is one thing you can do today to step out of the shame cycle? This isn't about making a massive leap or transforming your life overnight. It's about taking one small step. Maybe it's reaching out to a friend, journaling about a moment of shame you're ready to let go of, or simply saying to yourself, I'm not defined by this. Whatever it is, let it be something that feels meaningful to you. Today, we tackled one of the hardest and most isolating emotions, shame. It's the kind of topic that doesn't just sit on the surface. It digs deep, festers, and often feels overwhelming to confront. But the truth is, shame only holds power over us when we let it stay in the dark. We uncovered what shame really is, a universal experience that makes us feel unworthy or flawed, and how it sneaks into our lives in ways we often don't even realize. From childhood experiences to moments of vulnerability, shame has a way of rooting itself into our stories. But the most important thing is it doesn't have to stay there. Today, we learned shame thrives in silence, but healing begins when we name it. Just like Voldemort in Harry Potter, shame gets scarier the longer we refuse to name it. Once you call it out, whether by journaling or speaking to a trusted person or even just saying it to yourself, you take away its ability to grow in the dark. We also learned about reframing shame with curiosity and self-compassion, transforming it into a tool for growth. Instead of letting shame spiral into self-criticism, try approaching it with curiosity. Ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? What can I learn from this? And remember to treat yourself the way you would treat a friend, with kindness, understanding, and grace. Lastly, we learned that you are not alone in this journey. Connection is key, and your story deserves to be heard. Shame, it wants you to feel isolated. But the truth is, sharing your story in a safe space can be one of the most healing things you do. Whether it's through a trusted friend, a therapist, or a community like the Rewrite Collective, connection helps remind you that you are never alone. Shame is a powerful force. It can help us believe that we're unworthy, broken, or irredeemable. But you are so much more than your shame. You are resilient, you are worthy, and you are capable of healing. Every single step you take, whether it's naming your shame, reframing it, or connecting with others, is a step toward freedom. Each small action is a victory, and with every victory, you're reclaiming the parts of yourself that shame tried to take away. Let this be your reminder. Shame is powerful, but your voice is stronger. You are not your shame. It doesn't define you, it never has, and it never will. Every time you name it, challenge it, and release it, you're not just breaking free. You're rewriting your story. One step, one moment, one choice at a time. Let's end today with a powerful affirmation. I would like you to say it out loud, write it down, or just close your eyes and let the words settle into your heart. I am not my shame. I am worthy of healing, growth, and happiness. Now, one more time for the peoples whose brains didn't listen. I am not my shame. I am worthy of healing, growth, and happiness. This is not just a phrase, it's a declaration. It's a reminder that your worth isn't tied to your past, your mistakes, or the shame you carry. It's a truth you deserve to believe even when it feels impossible. On the hard days, when the shame wizard whispers lies into your ear or you feel the weight of your struggles pressing down, come back to this affirmation. Speak it, even if your voice shakes. Write it down, even if your hands tremble, and let it serve as your anchor, your reminder that shame does not define you. You are so much more than the moments that have tried to break you. You are resilient, you are capable, and you are enough. I want you to carry this affirmation with you like a shield, and when shame tries to creep back in, hold it up and remind yourself of this truth. You are worthy of happiness, even in the messiest chapters of your story. Let this be your light in the dark. One small but mighty step forward toward rewriting your narrative. One word, one moment, one choice at a time. Let's keep this conversation alive. If today's episode resonated with you, don't let it stop here. Healing isn't something we do alone. It's a journey we take together. Here is how you can take action and stay connected. Join the Rewrite Collective. Your story matters, and this is the space to share it. Connect with others who understand, find tools to support your mental health, and build a community that's about growth, not judgment. And don't forget about the Pack Your Kit movement. What's in your mental health toolkit? Whether it's journaling, mindfulness, or a favorite playlist, share your toolkit with us using the hashtag #PackYourKit. Together, let's empower and inspire one another to take charge of our mental health. And what's coming next? Next week, in episode 6, we're going to dive into a topic that's deeply personal and long overdue: navigating relationships after an attempt. For the first time, I'll be joined by a very special guest, my fiancé. Together, we'll share the raw, unfiltered truth about how suicide attempts have impacted our relationship, the challenges we face, and the tools we've used to rebuild trust, connection, and love. You won't want to miss this heartfelt and eye-opening conversation about what it takes to navigate relationships after an attempt, whether it's with a partner, family member, or a friend. Until then, remember, you are not alone. Your story matters, and you are worthy of love, connection, and everything beautiful that life has to offer. Let this be the week you take one small step, whether that's naming your shame, building your toolkit, or reaching out to someone who gets it. You've got this, and we're in this together. Take care of yourself, babe. I'll see you next week. I love you, and you matter, my friend.